Hey guys, what's up? It's Ripe again. In today's video, a Karen's insanely entitled brat tries to steal my insulin pump and Karen helps him do it. She rips off my pump and slaps me when I try to get it back. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the video. The title story starts like this. I am a type 1 diabetic woman and I've been living with this condition for as long as I can remember. Being type 1 diabetic means that my body doesn't produce insulin, a hormone that regulates the amount of sugar in my blood. Instead, I have to manually inject myself with insulin several times a day or use an insulin pump that is connected to my body. Living with type 1 diabetes has its challenges. For one, I have to carefully monitor my blood sugar levels and I cannot just eat whatever I want without considering how it will affect my insulin levels. If my blood sugar drops too low, I can feel dizzy, shaky and confused. If it goes too high, I can experience fatigue and thirst. Last week, I was on a bus going back home. As I settled into my seat, I noticed a woman with a young boy sitting a few rows ahead of me. The boy was screaming loudly and the mother didn't seem to be doing anything to quiet him down. I felt myself getting annoyed and frustrated. I had a long day at work and just wanted a peaceful ride home. But this woman seemed completely indifferent to the fact that her son's behavior was inconveniencing others. As the screaming continued, I could feel my blood sugar level rising. Stress can affect my insulin levels and I knew I needed to find a way to calm down. I took a deep breath and reminded myself that getting angry would not solve anything. After a few minutes of trying to calm myself down, I felt someone watching over me. I opened my eyes and found that a little boy was no longer screaming but instead staring in my direction, specifically staring at my insulin pump that was visible on my waistband. I knew right away that this was gonna be trouble. The boy turned to his mother and pointed in my direction and I could feel my blood pressure rising. I tried to ignore him, hoping that he would lose interest, but instead he started walking down the aisle towards me, a mischievous glint in his eye. When he reached where I was sitting, he made a grab for my insulin pump without even asking me. I was taken aback by his boldness and quickly pulled away. Me is me, Karen the rude woman, and Brad, Karen's bratty son. Me, hey, you cannot touch that, it's very important to me. Karen finally noticed what was happening and quickly intervened. Karen, what's happening here? Me, your son was trying to take my pump and I told him not to. I would appreciate if, surprisingly, or maybe not, instead of scolding her son, Karen rolled her eyes at my words and crossed her arms as she looked down at me. Karen, what's the big deal? He just thinks it's an iPod. Can't you let him see it for a minute? I stared at her for a few minutes, thinking maybe this was all some kind of sick joke, but neither was Karen replying, nor was she stopping her son, who still kept reaching out towards my pump. Me, I'm sorry, I think there's a confusion. This is not an iPod, it's an insulin pump that I need to manage my diabetes. Karen rolled her eyes again, and I was starting to feel irritated. Karen, I'm not dumb, I know what it is. But he doesn't, and he needs to see it for himself. Well, you look and sound and behave dumb, but what I wanted to say was, unfortunately I couldn't, because number one, I didn't want to start any drama with this woman, and number two, I was not sure that anyone would intervene to help me if this Karen started being violent towards me. Me, I'm sorry, but I cannot just hand over my medical device to your son to play with it. Karen, oh come on, it's just a little device. He just wants to play with it for a bit. What's the harm in that? Me, first of all, it's connected to my body. Second of all, your son can damage my pump or even drop it, which will cost me a lot. Both in money and my health. Please understand this. Karen, oh please, just say you're a selfish brat who cannot even give a little boy this much happiness. My boy is not freaking disabled like you, he knows how his hands work. Me, well, I can tell his hands work by the fact that he had not stopped trying to touch my pump even after I told him no. Being called out like this hurt Karen's feelings and she started glaring at me. Karen, my boy wants to see it and you're being difficult. Give it to him for just a minute, okay? Me, that's not gonna happen. Tell your boy to use his legs now and walk away. Karen, fine, be a little witch. I hope this device stops working before you reach your stupid house. I was taken aback by Karen's words and watched as she walked back to her seat without dragging her son away. The said son, or the biggest brat I'd ever come across, continued to make attempts to grab my insulin pump despite my firm no, and I started to feel more and more uncomfortable. I tried my best to ignore him, but it was getting harder and harder to do so. Then, all of a sudden, he lunged towards me and grabbed onto my pump. I instinctively pushed him away to prevent him from damaging the device or harming me. Karen immediately rushed towards us, yelling and berating me for pushing her son. I tried to explain to her that I was only trying to protect my medical device, but she would not listen. She started to make a scene on the bus, attracting the attention of other passengers. Karen, what do you think you're doing? Don't you dare to touch my boy. Me, your son was trying to grab my medical device. If you cannot control your children, don't have children for Christ's sake. Karen, you think you can do whatever the hell you want because you're disabled, huh? Let's see how you feel when I take this away. And then she ripped the insulin pump off of my body herself. I cried out because it hurt like hell and immediately tried to get it back, and this time Karen had the audacity to slap me. I stumbled back into my seat, hyperventilating and fearing for my life as Karen kept screaming. I was almost about to faint when I heard other voices speaking against Karen, and some helped me sit straight in my seat. They patted my back and gave me chocolate milk, and all the while I could hear Karen arguing with others now. KL for random kind lady on the bus. KL, this is harassment and I'm gonna ask you only once to give this lady her insulin pump back. Karen, and what are you gonna do if I don't hand it back, huh? Are you gonna cry like this brat? Are you gonna beg me too? Karen was getting all up in the kind lady's face, and I honestly felt so guilty at putting some stranger in this position until that lady backhanded Karen so hard that she ended up staggered before literally passing out. Her son started crying and screaming while he sat next to her. He even punched the kind lady a few times on her calf, but stopped when she glared down. I did notice later on that the kind lady was built like a frickin' bodybuilder. The veins on her arms were popping like crazy, and you could see the muscles under her fully sleeved dress. No wonder she intimidated the boy easily. KL, are you okay? I was so shocked by the turn of events that it distracted me from the panic attack I was having earlier. The kind lady handed me my insulin pump and asked if I wanted her to call the police. I hesitated a bit, but as soon as my stop arrived, police officers escorted Karen and her son out of the bus, where I told them I will be pressing charges. They asked for evidence, and I told them that the bus had CCTV cameras which they can use. The kind lady also gave the officers her number and offered to be a witness for me. I was honestly so grateful to her for helping me. This case is still ongoing and I'll be meeting the kind lady soon regarding it. I hope I can muster some courage to befriend her. She is so cool and badass. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I'm very glad that Karen essentially got knocked out in this story, because clearly someone had to teach her a lesson. Even better when a kind lady did it. Anyway, if you liked the story, please don't forget to post a comment and maybe even like the video, because that would help me tremendously. Thank you so much, and the next one is another revenge story. My friend Dan was smart and unconventional. He was a senior electrical engineer at a small company I worked for. This was in the 70s. While talking about cars and car modifications came up, he started explaining the importance of caster and camber in cars and why it's so important to get it right. He then laughed and told me, "Did you know the motor vehicle regulations describe the size requirements for a windshield, but you don't actually have to have glass in the frame?" He learned this because he built a street-legal dune buggy from scratch while in high school, and the regulations are crazy complex. Dan was smart, could fix about anything. He started going to community college to get a degree, but quit because he knew more than the teacher. As I said, smart and unconventional. Well, the company we worked for was bought by a bigger company, and our stock options because a nice windfall. I bought a new car outright and used the rest as a down payment for a house. Others actually cashed their checks. It was a real rush to have that much cash in your hands once in your life. Dan was one of those. He loved cars and he always wanted to test drive a fancy car. And how could they refuse him with a wad of cash big enough to choke a horse? So then he went to the fancy car dealer that had Jaguars, Mercedes-Benz and BMWs. As I said, Dan was unconventional. He was tall and skinny, he had hair down to his shoulders and a bushy beard. He wore jeans, a light-colored shirt and a denim jacket. This was before designer jeans became fashionable for men. He was never dirty, but frankly he looked like he came down from the top of a mountain looking for a good time. He was nearly always in a good mood and normally had a goofy grin. And Dan loved cars. He had lots of technical questions about the car, so he showed up and waited for a salesman to approach him, and then waited and waited and waited. The place wasn't busy at all, but after 30 minutes he was fed up. He was obviously being purposely ignored. So he gets an idea for petty revenge. He starts yelling, "I came here to buy a cash, and all of you just ignored me, and I was gonna pay cash." And he whipped out the huge stack of $100 bills he had, spread them out, and waved it around for everybody to see. Well, I'm never coming back to this dealership again. I'll buy my car from another dealer. And then he stormed out. He laughed so much when he told us this story, I bet it felt great. And you know guys, there are a lot of stories where seemingly poor people show up at a car dealership to buy a car in cash, only to then get ignored by the arrogant salesman because they think that OP cannot afford the car. And then of course lose out on the sale. I love those stories. Anyway, the next one is another revenge story, and it starts like this. I work in a theater, and it's not uncommon for audience members to cheekily try and move into seats they see are empty. On quieter days, it's not a huge issue. However, our unspoken policy is wait until the interval because we have a late seating policy and those seats may have been sold to someone else. Or at the very least, ask. So on this day, a while back, we were fairly full, not to the brim, but enough, and I was supervising. My usher told me a woman moved a few rows forward and was argumentative when asked to move back, which she eventually then did. Now, I don't have a problem with people moving along a few seats in the same row, because it's easy enough for them to shuffle back if they happen to take someone else's seat. However, I draw the line at changing rows, especially when they have just been told no. Well, the lights go down and the woman immediately moves back to the seat she was told she could not have yet. Without her husband, mind you. And so I go up to her and explain our policy, and she flat out refuses to move. She says in a very entitled and dismissive tone, "If someone comes, I will move." Right then, I was now feeling petty and righteous. During late seating, we wait for people for about 10 minutes and then let them in at the least disruptive time in the play. Alas, the seat the woman had taken had not been sold, but I had a plan, for I was on a mission. There was a couple said to be seated in the highest level, in other words the cheap seats that I offered an upgrade to because I could see the woman had trouble walking. My usher escorted them in, and I was delighted to hear about the woman trying to tell my usher, a different one to the one she initially interacted with, that she will move when people come. My usher said point blank, "People are coming, you have to move." The woman's husband leaned across, grabbed her and guided her back, looking quite embarrassed. I'm told so at least. During the interval, I could see her surly pouty face. It was glorious. The irony is, had she asked nicely, I'd been happy to help. And yeah, Ripe Stars, that is the moral of many stories we read. If you're not a douchebag and treat people with kindness and treat them nicely, you probably get the same response. Either way, the next one is another revenge story. I used to work at a marina when I was in high school that sold gas and allowed people to dock for free if they wanted to. Now, one day a guy comes in on a pretty big boat, comes in and gets a lot of gas, like $400 worth of gas. He comes to the counter to pay and gives me $400 in $100 bills, and I accept them and he goes on his merry way. Fast forward a week or so and I'm told by my boss that the bills he paid in were all counterfeit bills. Unfortunately, as he paid in cash, we had no way of tracking him down, so we think that he just got away with stealing $400 worth of gas. That is until this idiot comes back after about a month and a half thinking he got away with stealing the gas. When he comes back in, I recognize the guy and tell my coworker to call the police right away. However, I knew that this guy would just leave if I let on that I had recognized him, and we had discovered his plot to get free gas, so I decided to pretend that I don't recognize him. Luckily for me, this guy asks to dock the boat for an hour or so on our dock, and I tell it's not a problem. Now, it's policy to get the name and phone number of customers using free dockage, as well as asking that they leave their keys in the boat so that we can move the boat to a different dock if needed. He complies to all of the rules and leaves his boat, and he leaves his keys with me. After probably about 15 minutes of waiting, the police show up on the dock and ask my boss where the guy is. My boss tells them he just left his boat, but we have his number and can get him to come back to the boat, and he then instructs me to do just that. At this point, I was pissed at this dude for making me look dumb for basically losing $400, so I call and tell him, "Hey, this is me from Marina. It seems as though there is an issue with your engine and it seems to be smoking." For those that don't know boats that well, engines are very expensive, and this one in particular was a 350 horsepower Yamaha engine, which is top of the line, so that man got back to that boat in record time. When he got back to the boat, the look on his face when he saw two cops waiting for him was priceless. He tried to play it off and act like he had done nothing wrong, and he didn't know why the police were there, but that was short-lived as they arrested him and told him why he was being arrested. It turns out the guy had almost $2,000 in counterfeit $100 bills on him. And yeah, Ripe Stars, make sure if you are stupid enough to pay with fake bills, then at least don't act like a douchebag and draw suspicion on you. What a stupid entitled person. And the next one is titled Crazy Revenge. First, a bit of backstory to set the stage for this one. We will go way back first. High school sucked because I was a forever friend-zoned nerdy gamer guy, so I decided for my senior year I was going to get out of Ohio and study abroad. I slept through 3 years of German, so I applied to go to Germany. Ended up getting placed in Salzburg, Austria, which is the most beautiful place on earth I've been to date and need to visit again soon. The study abroad place had a few warnings for the next year before I left. Don't get in criminal trouble, don't get bad grades, and don't fall in love. My only danger with the first one was my lead foot. I totaled my first car but was allowed to drive my old man's 95 Ranger 4-cylinder 5-speed, and it barely got out of its own way. The second one I did enough to get C's and B's without caring much, and the third one OP. Through some teenage angsty drama that is a story for another time, I ended up meeting, dating and falling madly in love with my now wife and mother of my daughter. I am 17, work full-time for summer. As stated, my old man lets me borrow his truck after I get off work. The rules are I have to be home by 10 weekdays and 11 on weekends. He justifies this that if I broke down or whatever, he would have to come to get me and fix the truck before he had to leave for work at 6. To my turbocharged hormones, this is tyranny. I spend every moment I'm not at work with my girlfriend because boobs and making out are awesome. But summer is quickly coming to an end and I have to leave the country. The last day before I have to leave, my old man eases the restriction and says I can have until midnight to be home and can be gone all day. We leave for New York City the next morning at 10. This is when I hatch a plan. I am leaving the country, so I cannot be given a worse curfew or extra chores, and my family would not piss away this study abroad money unless it was dire. I spend the whole day with my girlfriend and tell her to wait up after I leave. I have a surprise. I drive home and make it there at 11:58, creep into my room and spend the next hour aiming her. At 1, I roll the truck down the driveway and head back to her house, fall asleep with her in my arms. Life is perfect. I knew full good and damn well that I was breaking the intent but not the letter of the law. My argument was that my old man never said how early I could go to her house. I never woke up before noon, so it was just left unsaid. Perfect malicious compliance in my head. So I wake up at 9, just enough time for a teary goodbye and to haul ass home to head to New York City to fly to Vienna. But I look out the door and the truck is gone. I panic and realize I'm a dead man, my trip is off, I'm gonna have to work all the hours to pay my old man back for a stolen truck and the wasted trip. I'm never gonna have time to see my girlfriend and I'll never experience Europe like I wanted. I call my old man in this panic to hear him answer with deafening silence upon hearing the news. Now for my old man's pro-revenge, he heard me roll in just before midnight and went fully to sleep. He did not hear me roll out at 1 because years of playing Dungeons and Dragons taught me how to be a good sneaky archer type. But when he woke up at 6 and saw both the truck and I were gone, he knew there was only one place in the world I could possibly be. So he and my stepmom drove over to my girlfriend's house and with the spare key took the truck and went home. When he got my call a few hours later, he gave a full 30-second beat and then began yelling and told me I better find his damn truck or I was never gonna see the outside of my room again, much less my girlfriend or Austria. I am freaking out, running around her neighborhood asking if anyone had seen the truck to call the cops when he calls back 5 minutes later, laughing his butt off. He tells me he stole the truck and I was in deep trouble and I better be home fast. He makes me get a ride home with my girlfriend and her mom. When I arrive, he is standing in the driveway, smug as hell. I get berated for an entire 6-hour drive to New York about how big of a dumbass I am and leave the country as planned. It all works out in the end. I got the girl who I am happily with 17 years later and the truck until she died of Ohio rust 12 years later. And yeah guys, that was an absolutely perfect malicious compliance story, sprinkled with a little bit of revenge from his old man. The next one is titled Revenge on My Wife. My wife decided to take a week-long break about a month and a half ago. She said it had nothing to do with me, she just needed some time on her own. I let her go and encouraged her even, I only wanted what was best for her. The very next day, she started posting on social media, saying a bunch of things like, "I love the wrong person," and "You deserve someone that supports you," etc. Standing on the outside, it's easy to assume I did something wrong here. But honestly, I'm a romantic guy. I gave 110% into making sure the love of my life had everything. Here is the revenge bit. She asked for a divorce and has been making baseless lies about me to everyone I know over the last month and a half. Well, 2 weeks ago, she got laid off and has been collecting unemployment. I just finished filing a form to report her for fraud since she is working 2 jobs under the table that pay more than her previous job and collecting unemployment on top of it. I also made sure to get her to text me details about said jobs and screen cap them. Legally, I know I'm in the right, but it's still a bad vindictive thing to do. But honestly, I feel so good for screwing her over, knowing she won't be able to afford the house that she kicked me out of anymore. And wow guys, I gotta say, OP does not lose any time to get this revenge done. I am kind of impressed by this. Would you have done the same if you were in OP's position? Let us know in the comments. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.